Hey, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing how to build the FT MiG-3. Now, if you haven't seen the release video of the FT MiG-3, it's going to be linked down below. I'd strongly encourage you to go check it out. Now, the FT MiG-3 is a very special design. It's actually a great collaboration between four amazing gentlemen in our FT community. That's Nerd Nick, who originally designed the Nerd Nick MiG-3, Dan Sponholz for designing these beautiful 3D printed parts that you can add on for free, and we are going to have links down for that below, and also Miles and Richard Kennedy. They actually took the MiG-3 and made it so you can download a free file and practice flying it before you even build it. Now, there are a couple key differences between the original Nerd Nick MiG-3 and the FT MiG-3. What we did is we like to take the poster board out of the picture, so we actually have foam board molded around, but we also have a top hatch to make battery installation and CG even easier to achieve. Now, if you haven't already, you can download the free plans, or you can support us by going to the store and get your speedboat kit. Let's go ahead and get our materials and we'll get started. Before we get started with the airframe, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards the servos. Sending your servos ahead of time is going to help the build go smoother. It's also going to ensure when you plug everything in that your controls are nice and centered. We do this by using a servo centering tool. Now, take careful note, you get lots of servo arms in a selection. We're going to use on the ES08A2s the servo arms that you see right here. Along with getting our servos ready, we're also going to pull out the extensions. Now, these are 20 to 30 centimeter extensions. If you don't have these and you need this electronics, we include all these in our electronics C-Pack. Now, it's really important before we install the servos that we center them and we also install the proper servo horns. This is going to change from model to model. So in this one here, these are the 9051s. This process is the same even if you're using the ES08A2s, which are 9-gram servos. These are 4.5 grams. In this build, we're going to be using the smaller of the X control horns, which is this one right here. Now, you're going to notice that there's two arms that are longer and two arms that are shorter. We're going to preserve only one of the shortest arms. So we're going to take this and flip it over on its back, and we're going to cut off the extra 3. Watch your eyes. These servos are incredibly high quality, even though they're very economical. I'm going to put this on to show you how well centered they are from the factory. I'm going to plug this into our servo centering tool. If you don't have one of these tools, it is so convenient and so useful in so many ways. I strongly recommend you getting it. This is only about $7 from our store. We'll have a link down below for you to use. On the side of a servo centering tool, you're going to notice 3 indicators. You got your servo, which is your signal wire, your positive, and your negative. We're going to line up the ground wire with the negative, the power's in the middle, and the signal wire, which is usually white or yellow, will be on the top. For powering this, a simple quick tip that you can do if you don't have a single cell battery is using the balance lead of a 2 or 3 cell battery. Now, you're going to notice on the battery you always have a power indicated wire. So here's your positive red, all the rest are considered negatives, and we're going to only take the red one up to line up with the power and the ground on the servo centering tool. You don't want to put a 2 cell on this because it's going to destroy your tool and your servos and void your warranty. So now I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to plug my power line into the middle, my ground going down towards the bottom, and now I have 1 cell worth of power. Now, you're going to notice that these multiple ports are here. It doesn't matter which plug you plug in to power a unit, and you can center 3 servos at one time. This tool also works to test motors and ESCs. Now that we have this, you can see that I can move my servo back and forth with no problem. When I was talking about how well centered this is up, I'm going to turn this to the extreme, and I'm going to clip center, and you're going to see it's spot on from the factory. You never want to take this for granted, because if you do and you install this and you need to power it on, you're going to use all your sub trims and all your trim to override it. What centered servo technically is basically just telling the servo to be in the center position so it has equal throws both ways. Now, with this servo guide, if I flip the center and you see something like this, all you need to do is install your servo horn at 90 degrees. Once we're happy with that center, we're going to drop in the shortest little screw and twist it down in. You notice with my fingers I supported the screw as I turned it in so I didn't strip out the gears. Now we're going to do the exact same on the opposite one. The only difference is we want this servo horn to go the other direction. Kaboomskis. Plug it in. There you go. Once again, centered beautifully. Drop the shortest screw in our pack in there. And there we have it. The Emax servo is one of our favorite servos. We've been using them forever. The only time we ever get failures is in a very hard crash or if someone puts too much voltage through it. Alright, our servos are now centered. Our control horns are on. We're ready to move to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to create the Powerpod, mount the motor and the electronics, and make sure your motor's running in the proper direction. Now that we have our servos centered, we're going to go ahead and move our attention towards the Powerpod. Now this Powerpod is a little bit of an updated style. It still is backwards compatible with all of our previous designs, but we have a couple cut holes here just to help you route the ESC on the top inside the Powerpod or on the bottom below the Powerpod. So let's go ahead and get our materials in order. We're going to go ahead and take our firewall that's included in the kit and also our Powerpod that you see here, and we're going to go ahead and clear out the cavities here and here. I'm going to just take my razor blade, lightly guide it down. And a very cool tip is you can actually dull the very tip of your razor blade so that way you can get closer to the paper without cutting through. Let's go ahead and fold this over 180 degrees. And if we cut down far enough, close enough to the paper, this is going to come out in one nice clean chunk. If it doesn't, don't worry about that. You can always take your razor blade and scrape it out. One more time. There we go. Nice clean cavities both here and here. Now with all of our models, there's something that's very common called an A-fold and a B-fold. These are fold techniques that we're going to use throughout all of our models that we design to make the building process easier and more efficient. What we're going to have here is an A-fold. And if you look at the cross section, that A-fold explains exactly how we want the airplane to fold together. We want the side plates above the bottom plate, so think A above. So we're going to go ahead and do a practice here real quick. We're going to leave our side plate on the ground or on the table, and we're going to rotate the bottom plate up so that the side plate sits above the bottom plate, and we can use the table as our friend to get a nice square joint. While we're doing this, always keep your triangle close by. So now that we have a nice fit here, we're going to go ahead and take our hot glue gun. This is an AdTech Pro 200. It delivers plenty of glue. We're going to start about 1/4 inch from the edge, and we're going to deliver most of our glue on the edge that's going to be glued, not on the paper. We're going to stop about 1/4 inch from the end. Once again, repeating that motion, 90 degrees up, pushing against the table. The more times that you take your square and you go to the foam and make sure it's nice and square, the better your build's going to be. So after about 30 seconds, we're going to go ahead and repeat this process on the other side. Before we ever apply glue, you always want to make sure that you practice the fold first. This is going to help you with muscle memory and also help you make sure that everything is going to go together nicely. We're happy with that. Once again, we're back to our hot glue gun, starting about 1/4 inch from the edge, 1 centimeter for our metric friends, and ending about 1 centimeter or 1/4 inch from the other end. Back on the table, side plate goes against the table, bottom plate rotates up 90 degrees, and we're going to hold it 90 degrees and use our triangle friend to make sure we're square. Give these joints a good 30 seconds, hum a song in your head, You Are My Sunshine's my favorite one to go to, and make sure you let the glue dry properly. Now that our glue joint is dried, we're going to go ahead and install our firewall. If you have any kind of little glue balls that are sticking out, go ahead and remove those now. Now for the firewall, we have just a little bit more material than we need, but what we want to see is roughly 1 thickness of foam board sitting above. The rest can go ahead and protrude down, no problem. Once we've made our fit, we're going to go ahead and go to our Powerpod, and we're going to put a nice healthy bead right on the top. For our laser cuts kits, it's a little bit of underscore because of the laser, and that helps that bead sit nice and down, but make sure you put enough on that it's actually going to adhere to the firewall. Making sure we don't burn our fingers. I'm going to go ahead and set that down there. We're only looking for about the thickness of the foam on the top. On some of our designs, we have 2 skewers that poke through it and this aligns. We don't want this to change the thrust angle too much. But we have a little bit of room for wiggle. After about 30 seconds, our Powerpod's nice and dry. We don't want to go ahead and go to our next step and screw the motor in. We want to actually reinforce this with tape. This is absolutely crucial whenever you build a Powerpod, whether it's a mini or a full size, because the glue's not going to hold the motor on by itself. And if it does, after the first or second flight, it will break free. The tape is where you get all of your strength. So we're going to give ourselves about 1 foot. And we're going to start right about this notch right here. And then applying a little bit of tension, we're going to go to the other side. And then we're going to finish off on this side here. Now there's lots of different tapes you can use. You can use extreme packing tape with the cords in it, or you can just use this packaging tape here. But make sure you have nice and good adhesion all the way along. I'm actually just using my little triangle here and smoothing this out the best I can. Fold that over, just like wrapping a gift. So we're going to do this one more time, but in this case, we're going to go from the front and wrap onto the bottom. Once again, we're going to use about a foot of tape. We're going to double it up right as you see right here. Smooth that out. Nice thing about our brown water-resistant foam boards. There we are. You can reapply as many times as you need. And just to help this Powerpod be a little bit more durable, I'm going to go ahead and apply a little bit of tape and kind of round off these tabs that it sits into. This is going to keep those tabs from delaminating when you take that Powerpod in and out. If anyone doesn't know about the Powerpod, our desire is to get people in the air as economically as possible. The electronics are by far the most expensive items on your aircraft, and we want to give you the freedom to take the electronics out and match them with planes with light power plants. So all of our swappable series, you can take this Powerpod and swap it to it. And we have multiple different power packs, but in this Powerpod we have the B pack and the C pack. The motor we're going to be putting on is the 2215-09, and that's our C pack. That's for our warbirds and our bigger aircraft and our more experienced flyers. And if you're flying something smaller that takes a full-size swappable, you're probably going to be referred to a B pack. And all of our airplanes that we design, we refer to the best power pack that we recommend in every single one. So there won't be any confusion. Now that we have our Powerpod all taped up, I'm just going to go ahead and take my barbecue skewer. I'm going to open up our little holes here. These outer holes are for the C pack, and the inner holes are for the B pack. I'm also going to open up our little wire guide right here. And always make sure that you open up the center area that you see here. You can even take your razor blade and kind of open that up with that. Reason being is this is where the shaft's going to go through, and you don't want that binding, whether it's on the mini Powerpod or the big one. That slight drag that you're going to have is going to be enough to cause your ESC to heat up and your motor to heat up and possibly not work at all. So our Powerpod's done. We're going to go ahead and open up our motor. This is the Emax 2215. This has been a motor we've been using literally for years now, and we absolutely love it. We're also going to be partnering with Emax to hopefully make a Flite Test branded version of this with a couple other features, but that'll be in the future. This motor has a lot of versatility to it. It can be mounted in two different ways. I want to just open this up and show you all the pieces. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our 1.5 millimeter screw that's included in our C packs. We want to give you guys basic tools, so we give you a really nice Phillips head and a really nice 1.5 millimeter screwdriver included in that kit. And we're going to remove this top plate here. Now, keeping these screws right next to us, we're just going to take off this little cover piece that you see here. We'll remove the screws from our adapter plate. We'll set this down, line up our holes, and refasten it with the exact same screws we just removed. Don't tighten them down firmly until you get all four of your screws in place. Now that we have our adapter plate on, if we want to keep from losing these screws, we can do so just by sliding it back on and tightening it up. It's really important we don't put the prop on until the airplane's fully built and ready to be test flown. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the screws from our pack here. You're going to notice that we have screws to both mount the firewall to the motor and also to the firewall on the Powerpod. So first we're going to put our X mount on there. We'll line up our holes. You're going to notice it only goes one way. We have shorts and longs. And we're going to take our machine screws and drop them down in. This Phillips head is specifically sized to be able to work great with all of the screws that come with our power packs and also our servos. Even down to the 4.5 gram ones. And as before, we don't tighten everything down firmly until we get all four screws in. One, just like a tire. 2, 3, and 4. Now that we have our motor mounted, we're going to go ahead and fasten it onto our Powerpod. Pass these wires right through the hole here. some cases the Powerpod is going to have the ESC be external for cooling. Other times it's going to be internal for cooling. So you're just going to have to look at the build video and how it's set up on the main portion to see how you set up your Powerpod. You're going to notice these screws line up really nicely with our firewall. And we're going to drop in our wood grain screws right into the top. Take our Phillips head. If you're scratch building this at home, make sure that your firewalls are aircraft grade plywood. If you choose to put the top one in here, just be careful that you don't poke your finger. Now that we have our Powerpod on, for this model specifically, we're going to be mounting our ESC on the very bottom, and the battery is actually going to slide through a top hatch. On other models, it may be the exact opposite. You may have your ESC in here, and then the battery will feed around and it will plug in and your battery will mount on the bottom. Everyone's going to be just a little bit different. We're just going to open this up here. We'll pass these wires through. And now we can make the connection with our ESC. Doesn't matter which order that you plug this in, because once we check for rotation, we'll be able to know immediately whether we need to reverse these two or not. So let's go ahead and stop right here, and we'll bring our servo tester back into play. We're going to plug this in with the ground lined up with the ground, and we're also going to turn it into manual mode and turn the dial all the way to 0. Now we can plug in our ESC to our battery. And for this model, we want the motor to spin counterclockwise. So if you look at this, you can see that the motor is spinning counterclockwise. A really good way to tell is if you have clockwise windings like you see here, which is basically righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, the nut pulled in. That's a very good sign. If your motor's backwards and you're using a conventional counterclockwise prop, the motor will spin off. So that's all set up the way we want it. I'm going to go ahead and unplug this. We'll put the extra pieces to the side here. The last thing I'm going to do just to prepare for this model that we're building is I'm going to pass both the battery connector and also the ESC wire through to the top. We're just going to dress this up with a piece of tape. Put this all the way to the back. Every model is going to be just a little bit different, so just keep that in mind. The build video will explain exactly where you need to mount it. I'm going to take a piece of tape and just put a piece of tape right down like you see here. That'll hold it in place nicely. Now we can dress up the other wires exactly the same way and put a piece of tape to hold those down as well. Make sure that you don't have any brass touching each other, or else it'll short out the motor and the ESC. At this point, our Powerpod is now done. We're ready to move on to the main airframe of the aircraft. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to assemble the wing, install the servos, and connect your linkages. For our wing build, we're going to go ahead and take our kit and get these main portions here. Now if you're scratch building, keep in mind that the black is cut through, the red is score cut, and the blue is an indicator line. Once we have our pieces pulled out, we're going to go ahead and put what we need aside and put our attention on these wing halves. Now there's a couple pieces that we want to go ahead and bevel, and also that we want to make room for. That's going to be on the outer edge here. We simply take our blade and open up this cavity here. We'll remove the foam. We're also going to fold this 180 degrees. Make sure we have a nice sharp razor blade and cut a 45-degree bevel on both sides. To cut our 45-degree bevel, we're going to hold our blade at a 45-degree angle, and we're going to keep the bottom of our blade just above the paper and our top about the width of the foam inside. Always look ahead of your blade while you're cutting to make sure that you don't end up cutting into yourself or into what you don't want. I'll do it one more time. This is something you can practice on a scrap piece if you're nervous. There we go. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's going to be covered up. We're going to do the exact same process on the other side now. We have a really good video we can link down below. It's how to build without using razor blades. You can use those same techniques on this if you're nervous about using razor blades. All right, now that we have our pieces prepared, we're going to go ahead and flip it over on its back. And we're going to line up the bottom surface with the trailing edge and the center of the portion together. Let's go ahead and first line those up to make sure we're happy with the way they meet. And once we feel good about that, we can take a piece of tape. We'll go on one half of the board, smooth that out nice and smooth. Now we can lift up and we can line and take our time. Bring the trailing edge exactly where the trailing edge is and line up the center edge perfectly. Get these pieces as tight together as possible. Now that we have this taped together, we can open up this to form a crack, and then we're going to put a nice bead of glue right down in the center of that crack. Stop it and start at about 1/4 inch. Let this seat nice together. I always like to keep scrap pieces that maybe we popped out of here, and we can smooth out the glue over top. While we're working with the glue gun and this portion's drying here, I'm just going to take a drop of glue, put it on the paper on the far corners, and we're going to perform a C-fold. C-fold's nothing more than a piece folding around and the paper that's joining it kind of covering up the raw edge. Once again, we're going to go over here, a little drop on the paper, a little drop on the foam. Anytime you're nervous about touching the paper, because it does transmit heat very easily, you can always take a piece of foam and use that to put pressure on. I'm just going to go ahead and take this blade. We'll just cut off any excess tape that we don't want. We're going to let that dry for about 30 seconds. Now that our glue is properly dried, we're going to take one of our paint sticks that are included in the kit, and we're going to go ahead and cut it. Now on this model, you can build it with or without a landing gear. So if you want to take it off the ground, you have a nice smooth surface, you can put a landing gear in there. But we do need the area to be somewhat rigid. So we're going to use paint sticks to do that. We're simply going to take one of our paint sticks, and we're going to line up with where the spar goes and the other edge and put a score line. We can now take that score line and do a couple passes on it, flip it over, a couple more passes. If you guys have an X-Acto saw or a little scroll saw, you can also cut it too. But a couple scores on both sides and a little rocking back and forth will usually give you a nice clean break. We're going to make 2 of these. Just match this up. We've got our line. Three or 4 passes, that's all you need. I like to just wiggle it back and forth. A nice clean break. Let's go ahead and glue these down in place. Now on your kit, you can see that we already have the lines cut for where our landing gear is going to go. We don't want to fill that with glue. So what we're going to do is just put a bead on the outer edges here, and we'll press fit this down in. Make sure that your edge doesn't go over to where the spar is going to pass through. Same process on the other side. Now that we have our reinforcements down, we're going to go ahead and put our main spar in there. This main spar is nothing but a piece of foam, and it's going to lay the entire width of the bottom surface of the wing. A little on the side here. Once again, we're keeping away from where the landing gear is going to go. We don't want to fill that cavity in. We're going to hold this down nice and flat. Now to keep this wing really strong, we're going to go ahead and top coat this spar with a paint stick like you see here. Now you're going to notice that this paint stick protrudes out to where the polyhedral is going to take place. That's exactly how we want it, because we want to go from 3 surfaces down to just 2 at the wing tips. So go ahead and center this up. You're going to have about 1/4 inch or centimeter on each side, and we'll glue that down. Kind of rock it back and forth, make that glue nice and thin. Give yourself just a couple seconds to do that, and then press down nice and firmly to finish off your spar. All right, our 30 seconds have passed. We're going to put our attention now into folding the wing together. To this, we want to be very ginger because there's not much meat here and here. So when we fold this over, we're not going to want to push on one side or the other, but we're going to want to support this section right here in the middle. We're just going to rock this over, and what we're doing is we're slowly allowing the leading edge to crush in on itself and make a nice smooth radius, just like you see here. Now that we've got that crush, we can go back with our barbecue skewers And the one thing I want to encourage you to do is not to push this barbecue skewer down really deep to the other end of the foam. We just want to go ahead and kind of dimple in the outer surface of the paper. We're not even taking it down the full thickness of the barbecue skewer. We're just telling the foam where we want it to crease. And we're going to go back and do the same process again, but this time you're going to notice that the wing is actually taking a much more different shape. We want to establish the radius on the leading edge first, then we want to establish the curve on the wing second. What we should be looking for is a center section that's kind of like a long triangle, should be parallel with the bottom surface of the wing. Once you're happy with that, we can give it some reinforcement. We're going to make sure we have plenty of glue in our glue gun. We're going to hold the tip right against the edge, and we're going to put a nice thin ribbon of glue. I'm just going to go ahead and do 2. If you're new with building, you can do 1 at a time. Now we're going to take this up and over. Make sure that this top surface is parallel and the trailing edge is touching the bottom of the table. We're going to give this about 30 seconds. We're not gluing it down. All we're actually doing is helping the wing to keep its shape and make it a little bit stronger. After we've waited about 30 seconds, you're going to notice that now the wing has a nice airfoil shape even when it's not wrapped around the bottom surface of the wing. Once we're happy with the way this fits, we're going to make sure once again we have plenty of glue on our glue stick. Always keep extra glue sticks handy, and if you guys do need to buy glue sticks, we have a special blend made specifically for our water resistant and our standard craft white foam board. Alright, so we're going to start here. We're going to go ahead and put a bead of glue on the leading edge. We're going to come on our main spar, on the very tip here, on the very tip of the wingtip here, and then a nice stripe on the very, very back of the trailing edge of the wing. This is going to take a good quarter of a stick, so don't be too anxious, but make sure you move quickly. So here we go. We're going to do our bead on the leading edge. We're going to do our main spar, the very tip that you see right here, very tip of the wing, and right along the trailing edge here. I'm going to fold this over just as we've done a couple times before now. And we're going to hold this down until it's thoroughly dry. Notice my one hand right here is right over the wood spar, and my other hand is favoring over that little tab that we glued up. And both my thumbs and my back of my hands are giving even support along the whole trailing edge. Rather than about 30 seconds, let's give this a good 45 seconds to dry. And if at any time you start lifting and you feel that glue release, immediately press down again. It's better to take your time on this or have some weights handy than to let the wing kind of warp. Alright, this half of the wing is now done. We're going to go ahead and put our attention to do the exact same process on the other side. So just for a quick recap, we're going to carefully fold over, supporting both sides so we don't rip that paper in half, allowing that front leading edge to establish its radius. Now we're going to come back again, put a real soft dimple just on the surface of the paper, just telling the foam where we want it to crease. Fold it again. Once again, I'm supporting both wing halves, making sure the bottom's nice and flat against the table, the middle section is parallel with the bottom surface, and the trailing edge completely comes down and touches the back of the table. To get a little bit more crease over here, we can kind of manipulate that ourselves by our hands, just to get the creases to finish off what they're supposed to do. Alright, now we're going to take our glue, very, very thin ribbon of glue, pushing down in. If you want to go slow, you can do 1 at a time. If you want to go fast, you can do both. The more you work the glue gun, the more you're going to be able to kind of judge how fast you can go on these builds. Give this a good 30 seconds to dry. Make sure that your wing's established in its shape. This is going to be your airfoil. If we can release. Once again, checking to make sure we have plenty of glue in our glue gun. We're going to take a stripe down the leading edge, our center spar, our very tip here, and then following up with a nice thin bead at the very trailing edge. Oop, just kind of went over a little bit, that's okay. Move that away a little bit. Now we're going to hold this down, the glue nice and firm. One hand supporting the center section, holding the middle down. My other hand supporting that outer wingtip with that little block that we have for spacers. And my thumbs are making sure the trailing edge is thermally down against the table the whole distance of the wing. Give it a good 45 seconds to a minute. If you need to have a friend or use some weights to help you, that's just fine. So whenever we're building, we always kind of hold on to these precious pieces of scrap because we use them later, and we're going to use that right now. We're going to take one of our pieces of scrap, and we want to join this wing together with more than just the spar. We want to join this whole seam. And to do that, we're going to use our glue gun. We still have that one stick that we've been using since the beginning of the build. We're going to press that tip down. We're going to kind of force that glue inside that cavity. All the way back. It's going to look a little messy, don't worry, we'll take care of that in a second. I can take this over, smooth it out. Any of these techniques that you're nervous about, you have plenty of scrap foam board. You can always practice it on a scrap piece and then go to your actual model that you're working on if you're really worried. And one thing, if you choose the supports with the speed build kit, we strongly encourage you to do, trace out every piece that you have. You have a free set of patterns right here before you build. And if you need to go back and repair, or if you want to get someone in the hobby, you can share those patterns or let them build the one that you traced out. Just going to go ahead and fold over this little excess piece of tape that we have here. I'm going to take another piece of foot-long tape here, and we're going to go ahead and seal off the seam. You don't have to worry too much if there's a wrinkle, because you're not going to see this part. Just get it as smooth as possible. Fold it around. So we have a nice flat wing at this point. We need to put polyhedral in it. And what polyhedral is where the wingtips bend up in two different places. That's going to be this portion here and this portion right here. In our kit and on our plans, we have this little wing gauge that you see right here. And we're going to use that wing gauge and slide it at the very tip here to give us the appropriate amount of polyhedral. But first we need to tell the wing where we want to bend. So we're going to support this with our hand that you see right here. And we're going to lift up very delicately with a rocking motion. Just allow the wing to accept a bend. Now extend this just slightly beyond where the dihedral gauge is going to need to hold to make sure it doesn't put a lot of pressure on the dihedral gauge. That's just meant to hold it in place, but not meant to force it up. So that feels really good. We're going to go ahead and take that dihedral right along the line of the back crease and hold it into place. That holds it just fine. Now with the same process we used here, but with a little bit more delicate touch because it's going to be seen, we're going to go ahead and put a bead of glue down. Just going to kind of force that in. I'm not really pushing down hard on the paper, just letting that glue work its way in there. Once again, we can kind of be a little sloppy with it. We're going to put that dihedral gauge in. Now I'm going to come back with a scrap piece of foam and smooth out this glue. This is a very crucial glue joint, so even if you have to go back a second time and put more glue down, that's okay. Now, I've had a lot of coffee, so what I'm going to do is carefully take this weighted tape gun dispenser. I'm going to put it right on the center section of the wing, and I'm going to step back and give us a good 2 to 3 minutes to dry. And also get some coffee. Now this portion of the wing is dried, we're going to go ahead and reinforce it just like we did with our center section with a piece of tape. You can use either the thick piece or a thin piece of tape. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side now. Take our gauge over to the other side. We're going to support this with the flat of our hand. We're going to lift this up just a little beyond where the gauge is going to take it to make sure it's not fighting it too much. And when we're happy with that, and we've made sure our gauge will fit in nice and clean, we're going to go back with our glue and make a nice strong glue joint. Forcing that glue into that crack the best way as possible. Don't have to make too much of a mess. Just make a nice healthy seam right down the edge. And goes our gauge on that back seam there. Hold the center section down, and with our free hand, we'll squeegee the glue. So I went a little light on that, just show you kind of an example technique. Just put a little bead right on the top there, don't need to stress about it too much. And wipe off the excess. And we'll step away for a good 3 minutes. Alright, we're going to finish off this wing with a nice piece of tape here. If you pull the gauge out and your wing settles down, that means that your glue joint isn't strong enough. And you're going to want to go ahead and repeat the step that we just did with a little bit more glue, a little bit more dry time. Let's go ahead and cut this whole access hole out. This is where our servo leads are going to go through. Pop that off. Now this is a very thin wing, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult to route our servo wires through. And we're going to want to do this on the back side of the spar. That's what we're going to go ahead and do next. So our next step with building the wing is to put our servos in. We're going to go ahead and do this now so we don't have to attempt it later. Plus things are going to get a little bit more crowded later. Now you notice I didn't cut my bevel edge for my aileron. That's because I want to work with the aileron in its place at a nice neutral setting so I can set my servo up properly. So let's go ahead while we're at this and looking at this and inspecting it. Let's pop out these two little guys if you haven't already. This is just where our control horn is going to kind of seat into. Make sure our table's nice and clean of glue glob so we don't have any more dents. So previously in this build, we already centered up our servos. If you haven't, I would strongly recommend that you go back and do that right now because we're going to need them at this point. You can actually build this whole entire aircraft and route your servo leads later, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So we got our servo leads. Our first thing we're going to do is put on our extensions. Our extensions are included with our C-pack. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and reinforce this with a piece of tape. So we plugged it in, we lined up our grounds with our grounds, just as you see here. And I'm going to tape this down because I don't want it to come in plugged inside the wing. There we go, ground to ground. You can always come back with your servo tester and test your servos out to make sure everything's working properly. Now we want our servo control horn right here to be as far away from the aileron as possible to give it the proper moment. So this wing here is going to be over here. And then the opposite side is going to have this servo here. In our kit, we give you the push rods that you need, and we actually give you a lot more push rod material to give you the ability to cut and recut. You're going to notice I don't have linkage stoppers. I like linkage stoppers a lot, but they always have a chance of coming loose. So when I like to make a solid linkage from the control horn to the servo arm. So we're going to take this extra long push rod, and we're going to go ahead and just bend a hook on the far end. It's not going to ruin the integrity of your build. You're going to have plenty of wire to use. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide this on the very back edge and we're going to grab it inside here. So you can see we have one end of the wire popping out here, the other end of the wire is popping out right here. Now we can carefully hook on our servo wire. You can put a little piece of tape if you want to. And we're going to guide this down in nice and smooth. Kind of pulling on one end, pushing on the other, and we're going to bring this wire right out. Now we're going to just make a little bit of a dent on each side, and we can come back with our razor because everyone uses different servos. We don't want to take that for granted. I'm just going to put a little dimple on each side for its wings. And that's going to sit down nice and flat. Got a little tug. There we go. Make sure when your wing's upside down that you're not putting pressure, indenting the foam, or taking out that polyhedral. Our next step is to put our attention towards the servo control horns. That's going to be these right here. Let's go ahead and test fit it right into the slot that we have. I'm always supporting the bottom of the foam to keep the foam from getting distorted, and since we haven't cut this free yet, it's a nice rigid surface. We've already centered up our servos. If at any time this got moved, you can take your servo centering tool and recenter it. Now we're going to go ahead and guide our control push rod through the center hole that you see here. We'll bend it back. None of this has been glued down yet, so we have a little bit of adjustment that we can do. And with our finger, we're going to go to the outermost hole, the third hole out from the hinge line, just like that. What I like to do is mark this. Now we do sell a push rod Z-bending tool, which is really, really handy, but I'm going to show you how to do it with a simple set of pliers. That way you're not prohibited if you don't have that tool. So I'm going to grip this right where my thumb marked. I'm going to bend it 90 degrees in. You can see that I'm kind of keeping everything in its place to make sure that I'm still lined up as best as possible. And then I'm going to grip this, and I'm going to go 90 degrees up. This is called a modified Z-bend. If we want to make it an original Z-bend, we would bend this 90 degrees and finish that off. But I'm happy with the way it is, just like this, because I can take pliers later in the field, and I can actually make adjustments and give myself more throw if I wish. The employees had some fun with some googly eyes on my tools earlier. I'm going to cut this Z-bend off. Just like that. Now we'll set everything in place, hook it up, and press it down. Anytime we can set linkages up before we glue things down, and while everything is neutral, is going to give us the best chance to have everything just perfect. And that looks fantastic. Now my next step is I can just pop this out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and take my razor blade And I'm going to free up these ailerons. We're going to take it over 180 degrees. If at any point your razor blade is becoming dull, go ahead and replace it. And I'll show you a neat trick. I'm going to extend this razor blade nice and far. As I come down close to this edge, I'm going to actually start pulling the razor blade down like a saw. It's still going to glide nice and easy. And going forward, I'm just going to shave this. Still keeping that angle to give me the guidance, but I can go both ways. The important thing we want to see here is when we move this up and down that we have no resistance, especially on the downward strike. If we do, we know that we have to clear more material closer to that paper. To reinforce our ailerons, we're going to go ahead and do a reinforcement hinge. We're going to take the tip of our glue nozzle and we're going to press it against the paper and put a very, very thin bead of glue right over it. We're then going to come back. I can use our wing dihedral gauge and we're going to scrape off as much as possible. We want all that glue to force down into the paper and the foam and there to be no residual left. This is going to keep our paper and our foam from delaminating over months and months of use. Give that a good 30 seconds to dry and then check your movement. Now we can go back, and you know what, I talked about a modified Z-bend. Let me show you how to do a typical Z-bend on this. Just so when we land it doesn't catch the grass. We're going to grab this modified Z-bend and we're slowly going to rotate this 90 degrees so it's now parallel with our main push rod. Back in place one more time. Check the fit. Okay, just kind of get that wire guided underneath there. Perfect. Make sure everything sits down nice and neutral. Our holes are directly over our hinge line. Our servos sit nice and flat. Our control horn's nice and flat. Let's go ahead and glue it down. I'll let the servo up first. Put a nice bead of glue, keeping it away from the servo head. We'll press that down into place. Notice every time I press something into place, I make sure everything's still centered once again. After about 30 seconds, we can lift this up. Put a nice thin bead of glue down here. And press our control horn into place. Now we're going to be using a Spectrum 6-channel receiver, which I really like, and that also gives us the ability to do something called dual aileron setup. That's where each aileron is going to go into a separate channel. The nice thing about this is, say during this process we bumped this and moved it off just a little bit, we can actually individually sub-trim each servo to get it just perfect. If you use the Y harness, that's fine, but this step is even more crucial to make sure everything is neutral and centered, because when you adjust the servo, it's actually going to adjust both servos and sub-trim. Alright, this is now done. We're going to do the other side. So as before, we're going to go ahead and guide this through. We'll grab our little push rod, just as you see here. Once again, we're not pushing down on the wing and compromising it. We're going to hook our little wire here. We're going to feed it through the back of that servo. We're going to kind of push and pull at the same time. Pull it all the way through. Let's get this back as far as we can. We'll make two little dimples. Take our razor blade. Little piece there. Little piece there. And set it down in place. Now we're back to making push rods again. If you guys want to conserve wire, you can use the exact same one. You've already learned how to do a Z-bend, and if you have the tool, you don't even need to do this step. There's one. We're going to go from the inside out through the center hole. Okay. Alright, we'll press our control horn in. Once again, making sure that the control horn holes are directly over the center line, best as possible. We'll mark with our thumb exactly where it needs to bend. Carry that up, keeping everything firmly fastened. Bend 90 degrees in. Check our alignment, that looks great. We're going to grab this about 1 millimeter or 2 in, just the thickness of the wood. We'll bend it 90 degrees up. And 90 degrees over to make our Z-bend. So if you know how to do this, you know how to do both a modified and a standard Z-bend. Look at that, we have enough for 2 more push rods. So don't feel bad if you don't get it right the first time. You can always make a second one, but save the old one because you never know when you can use that again. You can always make them shorter, you just can't make them longer. Slide this in. Check and see how we did with our alignment. That looks fantastic. Now we can go ahead and put our attention towards our hinge line. Let's open this up. You can see I'm kind of doing this a little bit more real time this way, not talking through it as much, just to show you how fast you can build one of these models. And practice makes perfect. Our hope is that you're going to take some of these basic techniques and that you're going to design your own aircraft and share the free plans and what you know with the community as well. Free flowing. Reinforcement hinge. This simple step here can literally double the life of your model. One last test fit. The only difference I'm going to do here is you're going to notice it's sticker down. We don't want to glue the servo to a sticker. We want to glue the servo to the wing. So we'll take this off, make sure it's nice and clean. We can even scratch it up with a piece of sandpaper or the edge of our razor blade carefully. We're all test fit. Down with the servo. Just put a little glue on those scratches. Make sure our line's in place there. Press that down firmly in place. Make sure everything's still centered up nicely. Exact same process on the back. We're going to step back, let that dry for 45 seconds, and your wing is now done. In this portion of the build, we're going to be building the main area of our fuselage, our tail surfaces, and also installing our servos. So for our fuselage, we're going to need a lot of different pieces. We're going to need our top turtle deck, our tail assembly, our main fuselage portion, our front bottom, and our rear bottom, along with some formers for the turtle deck. Go ahead and pop these pieces out now, and we're going to go ahead and either do our bevel cuts or also weed out the cavities that we need to do the appropriate folds. Ready? For our turtle deck, we're going to go ahead and relieve these grooves that you see right here. And we're also going to remove the paper. Now this paper comes off in chunks, that's okay. You just get as much of it off as possible. For our tail assembly, we're going to fold this over 180 degrees. We're going to do a bevel cut right on the rudder. We'll go ahead and do this other portion here, and then we'll do reinforcement glue hinges on both of them. Notice I'm using the table as my friend to go ahead and bend that elevator out. And rather than making this portion here any thinner, I'm going to go ahead and do the bevel cut on my stabilizer. Go ahead and pop out these tabs while we're at it too. So we don't forget about it, let's go ahead and do our hot glue hinges. Straight down right over the paper. We've already checked it for motion and we're happy with that. And just what we put on, we're going to force in, take off the excess. Same process on the rudder. Open it up. Nozzle down right against the paper. Thin bead of glue, both portions. Force down the glue and scrape off the excess. After about 30 seconds, we can go back and check for the motion on that. Now for our main fuselage portion, we're going to go ahead and trace out our cavities. Once again, I dulled the very tip of my blade so I can go down as close to the paper as possible, but I don't cut through it. also going to put some attention on these front edges here. Now this main fuselage portion is absolutely crucial that we get these cavities as clean as possible. If the cavities aren't clean, it can make the whole fuselage twist a little bit. Your plane may still fly okay, but it may not look right. Just gonna roll that right out. Anytime you need to go back and scrape off any extra, feel free to do so. Just get that edge as nice and clean as possible. Go ahead and peel these off. Go back here. And let's just go ahead and pop out. We'll throw these over here because they make really good squeegees for later. Last portion we're going to do is we're going to carefully go ahead and cut out this main center section. Alright, 2 more pieces to weed out and we're ready to start assembly. This is the front nose bottom piece, same process as before. If you built many different designs from flight tests before, you're going to start seeing a lot of common themes. Our passion is not only designing planes that are fun and easy to build, but also give you familiar techniques so that the designs become more intuitive every time you build a new one. Our goal is to introduce one new step for every new design, so your skill bank increases along with your flight experience. This is the bottom rear. A little bit lower on that one. While we're at it, let's go ahead and remove this paper because this is going to be curled as well too. Just pop this guy out. The front bottom and the rear bottom are both going to have the paper removed so they can accept the curve. And we'll prepare this for our C-fold. So go ahead and pause your video right now and study each piece. Make sure each piece that you have looks exactly like what you see in the picture right here. And then we're ready to move on. Now for this portion of the build, I'm going to be moving most of these pieces to the side because we don't need to worry about them at this moment. We're only going to really focus on the centerpiece. Now I'd strongly encourage you, if you haven't already used it, go ahead and get yourself a triangle square. Once again, we have these in our crafty kits, but you can also get these at almost any Dollar General or any craft store or even a hardware store. Keep this handy at all times because we're going to constantly come back and check for square as we build this fuselage. So for aesthetic reasons, let's go ahead and address the very front here. This is going to be the easiest time to do that. We're going to go ahead and apply a generous amount of glue, about 1/4 inch in from each side. And we're going to rotate the whole fuselage up against the table, count to 5 or 6, and then rotate it back down against the table, pushing firmly. Give yourself about a 15 count. If you have to wiggle it back and forth, make sure you haven't glued it to the table, that's just fine. All we're doing is we're sealing the very front edge of this so the airplane lasts longer. Same process on the other side. Nice beads of glue. Up for a 5 count, you can see it's all kind of squeezing out there. And then right back down against the table. We always try to use the table as our friend to help handle the heat, but also give a nice even flat surface. I'm just going to creep that forward, and there we go. Our next step on our fuselage is to perform an A-fold. The A-fold is going to be where the side plate is above the top or the bottom plate. And so we're going to go ahead and practice that move right now. And we're going to keep this little guy handy as we do it. That looks really good. Let's go ahead and focus most of our glue on where it's going to matter, and that's going to be at the bottom of the side plate. We're going to fold this up to a 90-degree angle. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab this right here and use this to give me nice even pressure. On the other side, I can check to make sure it stays at 90 degrees. Give this about a 30-second count. Now, using the edge of our triangle, we're going to go ahead and place this down. Now, on your plan, this is going to be showing us, I believe, a blue line for crease. Dan Sponholz has done a wonderful job with his keys to really make these plans intuitive. We're going to hold this right along that line, and we're going to lift up the tail very gently, and we're going to establish a crease, just like you see here. And we're going to make that crease a little bit more extreme than what it needs to get to the center line of the fuselage, just so it relaxes right about where it's needed. We're going to do the same process on the other side. We're just telling the fuselage where we want it to crease. You can run along with your fingernail if you're scratch building and put that crease in. Our kits come laser cut, so the etch line actually allows it to bend on that line automatically. So making sure we have nothing on our table, it's nice and flat, we don't have any glue balls to dent our foam. We're going to go ahead and do a practice fold. And what you're going to see here, this is going to be our first B fold that we're going to do. B is where the side plates are beside the bottom plate, so B beside. So here's our bottom or our top plate. It's always in reference to the top or bottom plate. And here's our side plates. This time we're going to keep the bottom plate firmly against the table, and we're going to rotate this up 90 degrees so the side plate is next to the bottom plate. So take a moment and go ahead and practice that with your airplane. What you should see by doing this first, you shouldn't be able to do an A-fold automatically. It's going to be very, very difficult and not natural at all. So go ahead and practice that motion. Make sure that everything's sitting flat on the table all the way back to the fuselage. Make sure you can get that 90-degree angle. That's so important. And also, make sure you have plenty of hot glue in your hot glue gun. We're now ready to do this. We're going to go ahead and focus our glue where it matters, and in this case, it's going to be on the side of the bottom plate. So we're going to put a nice bead starting about a 1/4 inch. This we're just gluing on the paper, so I can go ahead and go on this 1/4 back against the foam board. Just put that paper down. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then we're going to wander right up the side plate here. Now, we've already made the motion, we know what to do. Bottom plate is against the table. Side plate comes up, meets it at a 90. I'm pushing down against the table to get a nice 90-degree angle. And I'm also going to come back now and check it for square. Give this about 30-40 seconds. Don't be afraid to check it and check it again. Alright, same process as before. We're going to go ahead and do a couple test bends. Once again, bottom plate's against the table. We're forcing that down, making sure we get a nice clean edge. When we bring these back to on the back here, you should see that they're meeting up nice and flush with each other like this. Everything looks good. Nice little trick if you know you're going to run out of hot glue. You can sink the tip of your nozzle in, kind of make a little puddle, and then you can glue your hot glue stick right to the back. Alright, same process as before. We'll just do it in reverse. We're going to go up that vertical, focus our glue right on the edge of the bottom plate. Where it's only the paper, we can put it on the paper. And right down against the table with the bottom plate, pushing against the table, rolling it up to a 90-degree, forcing it down against the table. Don't ever try to build an airplane up in the air, free floating, we're just kind of holding it. It's never going to be as square and true as if you bring everything down to the table and you use great tools like these triangle squares. We'll give that about 30-40 seconds to dry. Sometimes you unintentionally glue it to the table. Just a little rocking motion, you don't have to force it up. Just rock it back and forth, break it free. Make sure you go back and get those little glue globs off, or it's going to dent your foam later. Let's go ahead and put our attention on the very front here. We're going to go ahead and do the same process as we did before. This is a decorative edge. So we'll put a bead of glue up to 90, count to 5 or 6, down against the table, count to 10 or 15, rock it and kind of move it forward so you're squeezing that glue out, and give yourself a nice sealed edge. You're going to notice that this has a nice taper to it. We're going to go ahead and try to match that the best we can just by using our thumb and forefingers to establish a curve. It's not a very extreme curve, but what we want to do is we want to match this so when we test fit it, we're not forcing anything, it just naturally sits in place. Always keep this, especially with this model specifically, your square hand nearby, because as you glue more and more to this, it's going to want to move on you. We're happy with the way that looks. We've test fitted it. Now we can go ahead and apply glue. This time I'm doing on a 45-degree, nice healthy bead, stopping and starting about a 1/4 inch from the edge. We'll open this up just a little bit, line up the leading edge, line up the trailing edge, let it sit down. This time, I'm carefully going to go to the table. I'm going to rock it back and forth. Just like you see here. We can hold this down. We can check for our 90 on both sides. That looks really good. And we can set it upside down. I'll go back again, check it, and we'll let it dry. Now, one reason I never want to throw away big pieces of foam is we're actually going to go ahead and use this in the next step here. I'm going to keep these guys handy because on the MiG, you're going to see that it actually steps down a little bit. And if we try to glue this and let it float, it has a good chance of moving back and forth. We want to give it the stability so we can transition the spacing from the table to the tail. And that's roughly about a thickness of a foam, maybe 2 thicknesses of foam. So what we're going to do now is we're going to test fit this tail with the hinge line facing towards the bottom. So here's the top of the fuselage. And we're going to just put it into the notches. It should line up very nicely. Just like that. But you can see that there's a space here. We want to take up that space with a scrap piece of foam. So let's try it with 1. If that doesn't work, we'll go ahead and go with 2. Just over that center section. Just so we have a nice surface. That's perfect. That way we can make sure that the fuselage is square and that the stabilizers stay nice and square as well. Alright, now that we know what it needs to look like and that everything looks good, we can go ahead and lift this up. We're going to go ahead and put our glue on these portions here. We'll leave the high alone. We're going to come back and reinforce this, so if it's not perfect, that's okay. Make sure we don't have any glue globs making our fuselage out around. And then we'll pinch this in and drop it into place. So one of our biggest goals with reworking this MiG, which was originally a Nick Lechner design, Nerd Nick, was to make this as quick and easy build as possible. So that's why you're going to see a lot more tabs and a lot more use of flight test techniques. So if you like things like tapered trailing edges and smoothed over leading edges and other materials like aluminum spars, I strongly encourage you to go to nerdnick.com, download his free plans, and also consider giving him a donation for all he's contributed to the community. Notice as I'm holding this down, I'm constantly going all over this plane to make sure that everything is staying square. Don't take this step for granted, because if you have a twist up here, it can transmit back, and once you glue this in, it's going to be very hard to correct. Alright, our 30 seconds is up. We're done holding this down. Let's go ahead and fit our bottom portion in right here. So just as we did before, we're going to kind of mold this to the shape that we need. Keep careful eye on the thin spot, and we can actually slide this into place and press it down. That looks really good. Let's go ahead and glue this in place. We're going to then cut this area out right here. Whenever we're gluing a piece of foam like this, we're going to go at a 45-degree angle all the way to the back on both sides. And we're going to slide it into place. This is a fairly straight piece, so we don't necessarily need to go upside down and kind of mess with it. We can take a scrap piece of foam like you see here, and we can do exactly what the table is doing for us while it's on its back. And just like any time we put a portion on the fuselage, we're going to come back and make sure it's square. Give this about 30-40 seconds to dry. Now this is thoroughly dried, we're going to go ahead and connect these tabs just with our razor blade, a little sawing action. And we're going to get ready to put our rudder in. Now our rudder is going to be protruding out of the top of the fuselage, so we need to flip this over. Let's go ahead and inspect it, make sure we don't have any glue globs from our control hinge, make sure everything moves nice and free. And we'll flip this over. And I'm going to just pinch this leading edge here so it slides in nice and easy, doesn't fight me too much. We'll slide this right into place and drop it down. If you did this right, you should have full throw on both your elevator and your rudder. Press this in just a little bit more. We should see that hinge line meeting up very nicely with the very back end. Let's go ahead and check for square. That looks fantastic. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to lightly lift up on this just a little bit. We're putting a little tension on that hinge line, but it's reinforced. That's okay. I'm going to pump a bead of glue. I'm going to set it right back in, pressing down firmly. Come back with my triangle. Make sure we're 90 degrees to the elevator. And once that's dried, we can come back on the other side and just do an external reinforcement bead on both sides. Now that the top is done, we're going to do a reinforcement bead on the very bottom skid here. We don't need to worry about putting glue on these two fuselage halves. That's going to be held on nice, just the way it is. There we go. Let's give that 45 seconds to dry and we can move on to our next step. So this next step is really special. This is a new technique we're going to teach you, and this is also something that we're going to carry back into our previous designs to start getting rid of the poster board turtle decks and front hatches. This is obviously a common piece of foam board. If you guys aren't aware of this, foam board does have a grain, so if you're scratch building, make sure that the foam board bends in a way that's easiest. So let me just show you by example here. This foam board has a grain that goes this way. And you can tell because when you bend it, it bends nice and smooth. If I was going to try to bend it this way, you can see that it actually kinks all the way through that. So take a scrap piece of foam, see which way it bends, and then cut this piece out so the grain runs longwise. We want this to bend up very easily this way. To make this bend, we're going to go ahead and line up these two center tabs here and here on the edge of our table. And we're going to go ahead and roll it down, and then we're going to continue doing this, moving it about 1/8 of an inch every time we roll down. Using again the table as our friend, establishing the curve that we want. As we get closer to the edge, it's going to be easier to wrinkle, so be a little bit more ginger. And forcing it over. And then we're going to work our way back there, just like you see here. There's one half. Same process as before. Moving about 1/8 inch every time, just kind of rocking that down. I'm also slowly getting this parallel as I'm rocking. I'm moving the outer edge here a little bit more than the inner edge. And we're actually molding foam board. This water resistant foam board does mold a little bit better than the craft white, but we did go back and check it with the craft white, and this is definitely doable. So if you're just going to Dollar General and buying the Adams Ready board, you should still be able to do this with no problem at all. So what we're looking for right now is the ability to establish a nice curve, and we're going to go a little bit more extreme, and we're also going to be test fitting a lot. So I'm just kind of testing this out with my fingers, molding it. We can take this to the table and kind of see, okay, is this meeting up the way we want it? Is this looking good? Is it staying centered? And it is. Now our next step that we're going to do is, because we don't want this thickness all the way back by the tail, I'm going to hold this in, and I'm going to take my razor blade, being careful not to cut my fingers, and I'm going to shave this off to a nice bevel. I'm using kind of a saw blade motion just to get my cut done. This is probably one of the most rewarding spots in the whole entire build, mainly because it's a new technique, but also it makes the plane last so much longer than when the poster board. We're going to go back for another test fit. These notches here are going to sit on these notches. I'm going to press it into place. Make sure this is nice and centered. Notice that we haven't put this center groove in here yet. We want this to get its natural shape, and then we're going to put this former in to lift this up if we need to afterwards. That looks really good. Take your time on this part. Once you glue this down, what you have is what you have. So make sure that you're happy with the bend, that you don't need to go back to any other areas. And when you do choose to bend this, make sure you're bending it against the table and keep that bend nice and even. All right, that looks fantastic. So we practiced that a couple times. We know how to do that. One thing we're going to keep handy is a nice steel ruler here. If you don't have a steel ruler, go ahead and get one. A plastic ruler will work as well, but the nice thing about steel is the hot glue doesn't like to stick to it. So we can actually use this to our benefit and smooth this out. I'm also going to show you a technique on how to use the table as your friend, but it's not going to benefit you on the second side. So we have our steel ruler available. Go down one last time. Notice that we're keeping this centered here. I'm going to kind of overanalyze this for the first time since it's a new technique. And we're going to set this place just like you see right here. We're not going to worry about the second half at this moment. Plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. I'll show you where I'm going to favor the glue. I'm going to favor the glue a pretty generous amount because I want to squeeze down that paper. I'm not going to put any glue on this portion right here quite yet. I'm going to set this groove in. set this down. I can take my ruler now and I can press fit this against the ruler. This is identical technique to as if I took it to the table and press it against the table like you see right here, and then I can press against here. We're going to give this about 30 to 40 seconds to dry, making sure it's nice and dry, everything is hard in this area, because we don't want to go ahead and bend the other side and have this part release. Alright, 30-40 seconds is over. We're going to go to the other side, we're going to bend this around, we're going to make sure that that notch lines up. That's firmly down, nice and centered, looks really good. Kind of put a little bit of pinch there just to mold things the way we want it. Same process as before. We're going to form our glue, be a little on the generous side. At a 45, we want that to squeeze up and glue down that paper. Hold this over. Go to our ruler, massage it down just like you see here. The reason I'm using this ruler at this moment is it's a lot easier to be able to see the contour and the shape of the turtle deck as I hold it in place rather than the table. Once again, if you don't have a ruler, you can always use this process where you get it established and you move it down and you press against it. Just make sure you don't push too hard and it wrinkles the foam. Alright, this portion's now done. We're going to open up our two side flaps. We'll put a nice bead of glue. If you can see that, I'll go nice and slow. And for this step, we're going to go down to the table and press down firmly. 30-45 seconds until it's dry. Second side, same process. A little bit on the heavier side, we want that paper to glue down. We're going to come down to the table, make sure that flaps against the table so we're not gluing it to the table. Set that down in nice and neat. I like to do once in a while is just kind of rock it a little bit, make sure we're not adhering to the table and that we're going to pull off any paper. This completely changes the integrity of the whole entire airplane. This is now nice and rigid, it looks real nice, it's paintable, it's one solid color. We're really excited about this new technique and what it's going to help us with future designs, but also moving back and doing version 2s of other warbirds like our Mustang and our Spitfire. Now our turtle deck's looking really nice, but you're going to notice that we don't have this portion glued back yet. We're going to use a scrap piece of our foam board, doesn't matter which one, just make sure it's long enough that we can apply even pressure. And we're going to put a light bead of glue right down where the foam board's going to meet the rudder. And I'm going to support this to the back end because we don't want to turn the rudder one way or another. We just want to go ahead and make contact and hold it in place. We're going to do that for about 45 seconds. This is going to be under tension, so you want to give it a little bit longer dry time. We're going to repeat the same process on the other side. You can use foam board, you can use a triangle, you can use your steel ruler. Just find a way to press this up against the rudder, keeping everything 90 degrees, and let it dry. The last two items that we're going to be putting on our fuselage now is going to be this doubler right here, and this is going to actually be the receiving area for our hatch. So we're going to go ahead and do a C-fold on this. We're going to be careful not to have any glue go where our popsicle sticks are going to go, because we need that area to be open. So just kind of smush this down, line it up the best you can, make it nice and clean. Once our C-fold is done, let's go ahead and pass our popsicle sticks just to make sure we have no obstructions. Once we're happy with that, we can go ahead and put a bead of glue on both sides. We'll even put one on this little, each edge right here. And we're going to press it into place. Now this is a doubler for our back turtle deck here. This is really just to give it a little bit of support up. If this is really nice and centered, you don't even have to really worry about this. But the way we're going to go ahead and put this in is we're going to kind of sit on this side. So we're just going to rock this back former into place and let it sit down there. Once again, it's not really a structural item. You don't even need to put this in if you don't want to. The main reason I did is just to give it so it has a little bit of grip force. And now what we can do is we can go back and we can drizzle a little hot glue around that former and press it down in. Now that we have our turtle deck and our formers in place, let's go ahead and put our servos in and get it out of the way. For putting the servos in the fuselage, it's very similar to what we did with the wings. We're going to go ahead and get our two servo leads, and we're going to do a test fit into the fuselage. I'm going to lay this on the very edge of the table, using the edge of the table to keep from denting anything. And we're going to make sure that our leads are arranged so the servo arm drops down and the lead protrudes forward. So this is going to go to this side. All we need to do is just kind of drop it in. You can turn it vertical and use gravity as our friend. Pull it through. and then we'll press this down in place. This is just slightly smaller, so it allows for a little bit of crush for a super tight fit. So rather than forcing it, just kind of rock it into place until it drops all the way in. Now with our kit, we do give you 4 push rods, but I'm going to continue to use the same length because one thing I really want to see people able to do is build with friends and have the extra materials to do so. So I'm just going to take off this cut edge here. We're going to make our Z-bend. Once again, you can get a specialized tool just for this. It does a wonderful job, but I want to show you the DIY method. So for this one, depending on your flying skill, you can use different holes. We're going to use the innermost hole on this one. If later you find that you want to go ahead and increase the throws, all you need to do is unscrew your servo horn and lengthen it. Now this is going to be going directly to our elevator that you can see right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to carefully install the servo control horn. Just a nice even pressure, pop it down into that slot. And we're going to go to the outermost hole that you see right here. Now it's very easy to take our triangle and use that as a way to keep the elevator nice and neutral as we find the spot that we need to bend at. There we go. Go up against my thumb, bend 90 degrees in, rotate, and move 90 degrees up. Cut that off. And I can go ahead and slowly bend this horizontal back to our Z-bend. As you build more and more models, this is going to get easier and easier. This still, frankly, is one of my least favorite parts to do on a model, but the more practice you have, the better it'll become. There we are. We'll go back, we'll check. We have a nice neutral control surface. Our servo arm is nice and perpendicular. Our control horn is lined up directly over our hinge line, and it looks great. So let's go ahead and pop this loose. I can reach inside here and kind of lift this up just a little bit. I'll put a drop of glue underneath each wing of the servo. We'll press this down in. You can even take a little scrap piece of foam if you want and kind of smooth that out. Extra glue is just extra weight. And our final step is we can put a nice little bead in our slot. And press our control horn in. Always go back and make sure everything is nice and neutral. So we're going to do the exact same process now on the other side. We can flip this over 180 degrees. I'll kind of try to work in a reversed mirrored form. We're going to slide our servo. Once again, we're going to make sure our lead is pointing forward towards the nose and our servo arm is pointing down. And for our first test fit. Get that leading edge in there, kind of rock it down, we're supporting it. Once again, it's just a little bit smaller than it needs to be, so it's a nice tight fit. This is still perpendicular, we haven't moved it. We'll go ahead and bend it, and let's see if we have enough room. Let's get a little tiny. So we actually did all 4 of our linkages and only used one piece of the push rod that's included with our kit. Now if you are scratch building, you can get these push rods from our store. Also the firewalls and everything else you need to scratch build. The only thing you're going to need to have to go out and buy is going to be your foam board. Now for this one, because I want this push rod to go very close to the fuselage, I'm actually going to rock this out slightly. And I'm going to go in from the bottom. So because I want to fly fast and smooth, I'm going to the very closest hole. It's going to give us a much smaller throw. If you're looking to fly aerobatics, you're going to want to go to the middle one. Notch that down in. The last control horn that we have. Now we can use our little triangle. We can hold this neutral. Wander right over where it needs to be. Just right about there. This one I'm just going to leave modified. I'm going to go ahead and slide this in. Once again, if you need more throw, all you need to do is loosen your servo control arm and pop it out another notch. Lay this in, just give it a test fit. Always go back before we glue, make sure things are nice and neutral, which they are. Now we can glue everything in place. Little drop, little drop. Press that down into place. Go back to our control horn. Set that in place. Follow up, make sure that everything is nice and neutral. Make sure you give plenty of time, over a minute, of each control surface to dry thoroughly. This is going to be the thing that controls your control surfaces, so if you lose it, you lose that control. Make sure everything's thoroughly dry, and if anything is loose, go back and fix it. At this point, the main portion of our fuselage is now done. We're ready to move on to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to assemble our top hatch, build and install the canopy, and test fit it. For the front hatch portion, we're going to go ahead and use these 3 pieces, but we're also going to keep our fuselage handy as well. Also, it'd be a good time to locate the little popsicle stick that came in your kit, or if you're scratch building, make sure you get your own. We're also going to bring in our barbecue skewers. Alright, so for this build, we're going to go ahead and open up our cavities, same process as before. This is going to be a C-fold on this portion here, so we're going to remove the center cavity. We'll open it up. And carefully rock this out. There we go. Let's go ahead and open the cavities also for these 2 A-folds that we see here. Pop this guy out. Lay that down. Our last step, you're going to notice the center section here is marked. Mainly that's just a courtesy to give people an idea of what we're going to be doing and what's going to go together. You can leave that on if you want, but if it's dripped just like you see, no big deal at all. It's going to be indicated by a blue line on your plans. There we go. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with our C-fold. For our C-fold, we're going to make sure we have plenty of glue. We're going to go right down the paper. Make sure you're careful because the paper will stay hotter, quicker, longer. And then we're going to go ahead and trace a line. And we're also going to put a nice bead of glue down by that lower hatch. We want this lower hook to be very strong. We'll fold this over. I like to take things up to a 90-degree angle, push it against the table, get that top piece established, then fold it over on its side and press it nice and flat. This wouldn't be a bad time also, since glue is going to squeeze out. Make sure this hatch area stays nice and clear of any glue that may squeeze out. While this is drying, we can go ahead and put our attention here. We have an A-fold on both sides. So once again, the side plate stays on the bottom plate rotates up to make our A-fold. Bead of glue, side plate goes down, A-fold goes up. And we're going to take our square and make sure it's nice and perpendicular. Those glue globs off whenever we can. Alright, 30 seconds. Same process as before. This time we have these 2 little marks here where our popsicle sticks are going to go, so let's go ahead and go around those. Rotate this up. And we'll let it dry. Now while this is thoroughly drying, we're going to go ahead and cut our popsicle stick in half. It doesn't need to be perfect, just do a couple score cuts on both sides right across from each other. Wiggle and crack. Now one thing we don't want to have to do is when these tabs protrude through here, we don't want them to be too long. Because what will happen if they are too long, it's going to be very difficult to get the angle established where this drops down. We actually only want them about 1/2 of an inch, just like you see right here. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and put a bead of glue down right on the back here. We're going to kind of bend down, kind of get that over the best we can, and we're going to smoosh it down in there. Same process on the other side. Go ahead and press this on through. Turn it up, out, whatever way you want. Just make sure it doesn't touch. Little bead of glue. Up, over, and down. Just make those tabs as even as possible with each other. Next step is to go ahead and test fit our top rail here. This is going to give the rigidity to help this stay nice and true when the foam wraps around the top. So let's go ahead and first be really careful. We're going to press this down into place through the slot, nice and flat. Now that we're happy with this, we don't necessarily need to lift it up all the way. We can just lift it up about the width of our tip of our glue gun. We'll put a nice bead of glue right down in the center on both sides. First step to do will be to press it down. We'll use the table as our friend and make sure it stays nice and flat. We'll do that the same on the front side here. About 30 seconds. We can easily just kind of go on all four corners, making sure that the foam isn't warped up or dished out, and it's going to sit as flat as possible. So using a scrap piece of our foam board, we're going to make sure that this hatch here can slide underneath and grip a normal piece of foam. We want this to be wide enough, but we don't want it to be loose. We want it to just be a nice friction fit like you see here. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit. Slide the back notches in, little rocking motion. Front notch is going to drop down in. And it'll slide back in place. So everything fits really nicely. The way we're going to remove it is it'll slide forward, up and out. Now that we have our main top hatch assembly done, we're going to go ahead and sheet this with foam board. Now this is really special because this is the first time we've ever been able to use foam board rather than poster board. And now our goal is to actually mold this piece. Now every piece of foam has a grain to it. The grain is going to be similar to what we talked about previously in poster board. In this case, the grain of this foam runs this direction, which is going to allow it to bend very easily. Think of this as a piece of wood. You're not going to be able to bend the wood very easily against the grain, but you are with the grain. So when you're cutting this out, if you notice that your foam bends more difficultly in one direction than the other, make sure you orientate this piece properly so it bends easy. Now that we have this done, we're going to go from the center line, and instead of trying to bend this up in the air or even use our fingers down here, we're going to take this to the edge of the table. And from the center area here, doesn't have to be exact, we're going to slowly bend down and walk this in about 1/8 of an inch at a time. Take your time with this step. We're just going to work this down just about 1/8 inch at a time every time we go down a little bit. And now we can take it to the table and start forming with our fingers. Make sure you're not putting direct pressure or kink in the foam. Make sure you're letting the table do the bend. Back to the table. This is the exact same process that we're doing on the turtle deck. Now that we have our curve established, we're going to go ahead and just do a quick test fit. Placing this roughly in the middle the best we can. We're going to curl this up around. And press down. Now what we want to look for is we want to look that the foam is taking a curve where the whole side of this former is met with the foam. If it's not taking that curve properly on the front or the back, go ahead and mold it some more. Again, we're going to check on the front, and that looks really good. Now that we're happy with the way that the foam is curved, we're going to go ahead and glue the center section down, placing glue right here. Nice simple bead of glue. We're just going to use those reference marks. If you don't see them anymore, that's fine. Just center this up to the best of your ability. You're also going to see the reference marks you did when you're folding this. Now keep this item nice and flat. Don't let this wander or warp, or else you're going to have a hatch that doesn't have a nice, tight, clean fit to the fuselage. As we glue this down, we also want to make sure that we're not favoring one side or the other, but the flat of the hatch is hitting the flat of the foam right where it's meeting the table. Give us about 40 seconds to dry. Our top hatch section is now glued. Our next step is to repeat the same motions we did when we were bending the foam, and that's going to be doing one side at a time. So we're going to just do a practice fold. We're going to keep our hands right over the center section. We're going to roll this up, and we're going to take this just past the 90-degree mark. We're going to look on both the front and the back of the hatch, making sure the foam is nice and tight up against that former, and it is. We're just going to kind of let it sit there for a second. Let that foam really get used to where it's supposed to be. If we make the foam work too hard, it's going to pull away from the glue, and our hatch isn't going to look as nice. Now that we've done that, we're going to make sure we have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. We're going to put a nice bead down, and I'm not going to try to do this as nice and neat as possible because I don't want to make too much of a mess. I don't want the glue to squirt out the bottom, or else we're going to have to cut that off later. Just take your time. A little drop on the back there, a little drop up on the top former so it stays down. I'm going to grab a little scrap piece of foam here, just to have handy. Now we're going to fold this up just like we did before, right back to going just beyond 90 degrees. This foam has just a little bit of elastic nature to it, so whenever we're bending it, it's going to want to relax a little bit. I want to make sure when we release this that the foam relaxes to just about a perfect 90-degree angle. We're going to hold this for a good solid minute, and we're not going to be anxious about this because this foam is under pressure, and if the glue's not fully dried, it will pull away. While we're holding this, if you have any excess glue that's leaked out, go ahead and make sure you squeegee that off now because you want that edge to be nice and clean. Alright, I gave this a good solid minute, maybe even a little bit more. I'm going to slowly release this, and as I release this, I'm going to inspect to make sure that I have a nice solid tight joint here. And you can see that this foam is now wrapped around to almost a perfect 90-degree angle. You're always welcome to take any scrap foam that you have and practice these techniques first. Also, if you're nervous about this, trace these pieces out on a scrap piece of foam, and that way you can go back if you do mess up on one or you want to make another one, put FPV gear in it, you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and take a razor blade here. You can use your handheld one or this one. And I'm going to go ahead and put a score line as close to the paper but without going through on the other side. I'm cutting this nice and level, but I want to preserve that paper. It's easier to do this step now than to wait till when both sides are done. If you have any kind of glue globs and stuff, don't worry about that. You can go ahead and remove those now. I'm just going to ride that against it. And what we're looking for is to crack this area nice and clean, and I'll peel off the extra paper. Now you can see I'm kind of pulling that towards me because I don't want to peel the paper off the foam this direction. There we go. If I take this down to the table, what I want to see is that this surface is nice and flat with the whole entire hatch and that the hatch hasn't been warped in any way. Now that we've done this successfully, let's go ahead and do the exact same process on the other side. We're not going to take anything for granted. We're going to put our fingers right on the center section, pinkies towards the edge of the hatch. We're going to roll up 90 degrees, making sure that we have a nice solid fit on both the front and the back. And then after we've done that, we're going to go back with our glue. Once again, be nice and careful. We'll drop a couple drops down there. I'm going to keep this glue focused on the top half of the foam, so as it squeezes down, it doesn't give me any glue drops where we have to cut it off later. Just put a little drop back there as well. Alright. I'm not anxious for anything. We're going to cut another little scrap of foam. Now we're going to roll it up, do that exact same motion that we did before. We're going just beyond 90 degrees again, just so we get that nice seat against the foam, and when we relax it, it'll settle right at the perfect 90-degree mark. Now with this process, we're really going to be pushing the limits here. We don't want things to be complicated, but we do want them to be beautiful. So our goal with this is to be able to look at things like the big Corsairs. Instead of using foam or a poster board like we did on the mini one, we revisit that with foam board. Also bombers, Lancasters. There's so many great planes with beautiful round curves. We're going to try to attack those and give you guys the ability to do it with still the same simple techniques, but with beautiful results. So take your time and practice this technique, and our hope is that maybe you guys can provide some ideas on some future model designs that will look just as nice as this MiG-3. So our minute's up. Everything looks really good. You can see that we don't have any glue residual down here. Same process as before. We're just going to take this razor blade, and once again, we can kind of use this if we want. I like to just take a little handheld single edge blade and ride it right along that edge. There we go. Same process as before. We're just going to take this down, kind of pushing down and rubbing back and forth is going to make sure that we have a nice smooth edge on that. We're going to feel any glue globs that are going to hopefully peel off for us. And now our next step is we're going to go ahead and trim this back just a little bit, and we're going to glue this down right over top. We don't need all this paper. I'm just going to trim this back to roughly about 1 centimeter or just under 1/2 of an inch. It doesn't have to be perfect, no one's going to see it. There we go. And while we're at it, it's going to be easier right now if we remove this foam right here. Same process as before, just do a score cut, just kind of pop it out. Doesn't have to be perfect, we're just going to fold that paper down over. If you guys have ever built the sea duck, this will be really familiar for you. And this back piece, we don't need to worry about covering it, so we're just going to slice this off right through. There we go. Alright, now that we have our hatch pieces, we're going to lay down a nice healthy bead of glue right over top of that white foam. Back to our table, fold it down 90 degrees, and just like we did before, we're going to give a nice rocking motion, give it a nice seam. Same process on the other side. Nice healthy bead of glue, we actually want that to squirt out just a little bit, not glue it to the table, but cover all the paper. Back onto the table, down flat. Little rocking motion and we're good. Let's go ahead and finish off our hatch by just putting some slices here and here. Maybe every centimeter, maybe a little closer than that. You'll see what works for you. Once you paint your airplane, this isn't going to be really noticeable, but I do like covering paper with paper, not letting raw foam be in its place. Now we're just going to slowly roll this around, telling the paper how to fold in on itself. A simple bead of glue, just like we did. Rather than use the table, we'll go ahead and use our foam. We're just going to kind of fold that in slowly, pushing against the paper. Last step, we'll just trim off any excess that we have. And we got a beautiful top molded hatch. This is much more solid, it's not going to warp on you, it's going to paint evenly, it's going to look wonderful. Let's go ahead and give a test fit, and then what we'll do is we'll put the canopy on. So this is going to slide down completely and fold all the way back. You have a nice, even, clean hatch on both sides. Now just something to throw out an idea, if you guys want to take this to another level, Steve Avila did a really good job making a custom interior for our P-51 Mini. You can do the same technique by using this back portion, making it a seat back, and then cutting this area out and putting a clear canopy on and making your own cockpit. That's up to you to decide. I wanted to keep this simple, so for now we're just going to use a white poster board canopy. So now that we have our hatch on, our next step is to build our canopy. You can trace this out of clear transfer film and make a clear canopy, but we're going to show you how to do this out of poster board. Our first step is to go ahead and take a piece of tape, and we're going to form up the canopy. Now use the least adhesive tape. Like what I like to do is actually just kind of touch it and get a little bit oiled up, because I want to peel this off later if possible. Fold this on its half, just like that. We're going to do the other side. There we go. And then we're going to do the front. And all we're doing is we're going to make our poster board meet up with the other poster board as tight as possible. There we go. Now just to do a test fit, just to make sure everything looks good, our seam is going to go right down along this bulkhead that you see right here. And we're going to press this down into place, and we're just going to inspect it to make sure we're happy with the fit. Alright, once we're happy with that fit, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut myself a little scrap piece of foam. And being careful not to pass the heat through and burn my fingers, I'm going to put a bead of glue right over top of each one and then smear it into place. You can see that I'm not smearing all of it off, I'm just leaving a nice healthy film right over that crease. Give this a good minute and a half to dry because we want this nice and solid so when we remove our tape that this is going to hold the canopy together. Now that everything's thoroughly dried, we're going to carefully peel off this tape that we had. Take your time on this so you're not pulling up the paper. Go very, very slow. This canopy is most likely going to be painted anyway. So even if it pulls a little bit of paper off, it's not the end of the world. It's going to cover right up with paint. We're going to do this on all 4 sides. Now our final step is to make sure that we're really happy with the fit on both sides. What we're looking for is the side cheeks of the canopy just to drop down just below the sides of the fuselage, cover up that gap, and we're going to line the seam of the canopy right here with the seam of the turtle deck as you see like this. So make sure both those halves are nice and even, that you're happy with them. Now holding my thumb on one side, and apply a little glue. I'm not going to go around the whole seam, I'm just going to go right here. Press down right into place. Once that's dried, you can lift up. Same process as before. We're just going to put a glue right there on the seam. Press it down into place. We don't want to glue the top hatch to the lower portion of the fuselage. Alright, so we have our canopy and our hatch assembled. Let's go ahead and slide off and see how it looks. We'll slide forward, lift straight up, and we're ready to move on to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to install the wing onto the fuselage, add our optional wing flarings, our bottom scoop, and install the optional landing gear and tail skid. So as we install the wing, there are going to be a couple of elements that are optional that are purely aesthetics, but we're going to show you how to do them anyway. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we have our fuselage, we have our wing, these are the wing flarings, and these are the optional scoop for the bottom. We can put these aside for right now. So the first thing we want to do with our fuselage and our wing is let's give them a good test fit. We're going to take our fuselage, let's make sure our little control horns are up and out of the way. We're going to flip the leading edge around towards the nose. Just pass this area right through this top hatch. I'm setting it right down on the center line. Now you're going to see that the back has a groove and the top front has a groove, and it should kind of self-align for you, but make sure that this crease is right in the center. Once we test fit our wing, we're going to lay it flat on the table to make sure that our horizontal stabilizer is parallel with the center wing section that you see here and here. Take your time and make sure this is as close as possible. If you have to, you can remove a little bit of material from one side of the fuselage or the other to straighten out your wing. Now as long as we have the center section of the wing centered with the fuselage perfectly, the wing should be nice and parallel. So we don't need to go ahead and go from tip to tail like we typically do with most of our model builds. Make sure you take your time and center this up, sight it down. If you need to measure, go ahead and do so. Now that we're happy with everything, I'm not even going to remove this from the table. I'm going to make sure I have plenty of glue in my glue gun. I'm going to rock up this edge. I'm going to put a nice healthy bead of glue on this side. I'm going to rock it up on this side. And then once again, we're going to go right back, making sure that our trailing edge is centered, our leading edge is centered. Then we're going to press down nice and even. And then we're going to also go back and make sure that our tail is still parallel to our wing. I'll take that little scrap piece of foam here, scrape this off. While this is drying, it doesn't hurt to take your triangle again and just make sure everything is as perpendicular as possible. If you do this in every step of the build, most likely you're going to find that every step is perpendicular. While that's drying, I'm going to just go ahead and cut another little piece of scrap foam. And I really want to make sure this wing stays on. So I'm going to go back one more time, give a nice healthy bead of glue, this time on the outside. I'm going to press it in and wipe off the excess. After about a minute, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards some beautiful details here that you don't necessarily have to put on, but if you choose to, it really makes the plane look nice. These are going to be the wing flarings that were originally featured on Nerd Nick's original MiG-3. They're absolutely beautiful and really add a lot of detail. What I want to do is I want to lay this down so about 1/3 of this straight area here lines up with our trail edge and creases down to the table. I'm just going to go ahead and give myself just a little bit of a knife tick. You can also use a pencil mark. Also one up here, just to tell me where I'm coming and going here. I'm just going to go ahead and lay a piece of tape at the very edge here, just so I have a nice little hinge. And now very carefully, put a nice thin bead of glue right up to the very tip. And also, same process on the very top here. We're going to hold our tip down. We're going to bend this down 90 degrees and smooth it out. If any of the glue didn't take, you can easily just put a drop of glue back down. Only thing I'd recommend this time, use a scrap piece of foam. Alright, same process as before. We're going to get about roughly the same distance that we went on the other side. A little piece of tape to help us remind us where to turn. And there we go. Once this is painted up, the wing is going to look like it's going to transition beautifully right into the fuselage. Now that our wing flarings are done, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards the bottom scoop. Now, if your intention is not to put a landing gear on this, I would highly recommend not to even bother with this step. That way you have a nice belly landing airplane that will land real soft and not give you the chance of breaking the prop. However, if you are going to be using the landing gear, or you're going to be landing in tall weeds and you wish to keep the scoop, let's go ahead and start by clearing off the cavities that you see here. And we're also going to go ahead and clear the cavity at the very edge. As you build more and more of these designs, you're going to see a very common theme where eventually you probably won't even need to build video. We try to keep all of our builds as intuitive as possible. Alright, let's go ahead and open this up. We're going to go ahead and cut a single bevel on this portion right here. Main reason is we want that to fold up and meet this edge here. So if you don't get the same angle, it's not nice and clean, double the other side. Alright, let's go ahead and remove the paper. And these pieces are ready to assemble. Putting our attention towards the main scoop area, we're going to go ahead and keep this back area because when we fold up to a B-fold, it's going to go ahead and bevel down. So let's do a practice tilt. We got our square handy just in case we need it. We're going to focus our glue on the side of the bottom plate. Bottom plate on the table, rotate the side plate up. We're going to follow up with our square to make sure everything stays perpendicular. After about 30 seconds, we can do the other side. Always make sure we do our practice fold first. That looks really good. Glue focusing mainly on the side portion here. Back on the table, rotate 90 degrees up. Check it for square. While that's drying thoroughly, we can go ahead and start folding this. We're going to rock this with our fingers just to give it a nice curve to match our scoop. We want to make sure when we put this down that this conforms nicely, that we don't have to force anything. Just like you see here. Let's go ahead and do a test fit. We're going to start the fit from where the bevel is. Then we're going to slowly rock it back. Just like you see there. Once we see that everything's nice and fit, you can see that we have room to trim. That's perfect. We're going to open this up 90 degrees. We're going to focus our glue on both sides. Now we're going to use the table as our friend, and we're going to rotate up to 90 degrees. The whole time we're going to check and make sure that we're pressing it against and that our point of pivot is still in the same location. After 30 seconds, we can open this up just like a door. Now we can focus our glue right on the bottom seam line and then along the whole entire edge on both sides. We're putting our glue right between the foam and the paper so it glues the paper down nice and secure, especially since this is going to hit the ground. Now with a rocking motion, we're slowly going to rock this back, just like a rocking chair. Do this for about 15 seconds, 30 seconds, then roll it over and check to make sure you're happy with the fit. We got the main portion of our scoop assembled now. We're going to go ahead and cut these portions here nice and flush so it fits up nicely against the bottom of the fuselage. This is the same technique that we used on our hatch. I'm going to roll that across. Just do it a couple times. Nice flush cut. On the back, this is nothing but a very long taper. You can sand this, or you can just saw it off. Do a couple passes. It's going to be like a very, very long bevel. Doesn't have to be perfect. Let's go ahead and give this a test fit. I'm going to lay this on its nice flat here. Another benefit of that top hatch. And right where this seam meets, we're going to set this down into place and center it up. Now, as I said before, we're going to be putting landing gear on this, so this area is going to be fairly well protected. If you're not putting landing gear on it, I'd highly suggest that you maybe consider leaving this off, because every time you land, this is going to be what takes the brunt of your impact. If you do choose to kind of make this a sacrificial land part, go ahead and cover this up with some packing tape so it's a little bit more durable. Alright, that fit looks really good. I'm just going to go ahead and put a bead on each side. No need to go crazy. Bead on the front. Very back wings here. Once again, right where that pivot is, I'm going to set it down nice and centered. We're going to give this about 45 seconds. Now that our bottom scoop is now on, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards the landing gear. Now in our kit, we include 2 lengths of this medium gauge landing gear. This is a 1/10 of an inch diameter. And if you guys are scratch building and you need this, we do have this available at our store that you can get if you're scratch building and you want it. But it is included in the kit. First thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to follow this contour that you see right here. So let's go ahead and put our finger down right where that mark is. Grab some nice heavy duty pliers. This wire is very difficult to bend. You need a good grip. Pull that as close as possible. And what I like to do is actually bend it over a little bit and then straighten it out. Gives us a nice tight angle like you see here. Our next step is to take it up to the transition right where the line ends, and we'll mark that with our finger. Now being careful to make sure that when we're bending perpendicular to this line. We're going to bend straight towards us. We're going to take it about 90 degrees. Then we're going to bend it back just like you see here. We're now going to measure about 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters from the angle that we see. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we are going to match the second one up to this. We're going to grip this, and we're going to end perpendicular, making this line parallel and on the same side as the bottom line that you see here. So we're going to rotate that in. Good pair of pliers and a good grip. Don't try to do this with needle nose. And at this point, we can make sure that this lays nice and flat and that these 2 lines are parallel to each other. You can twist it. Just take your time. Looks good. We'll slide on our wheel. These are 2.75 inch wheels. I know they're a little bit big for a warbird, but if you want to take off the grass that isn't a golf course, you're going to need them. And we're going to cut this about 1/4 inch or about 1 centimeter ahead of the wheel. Big thank you to Kevin Teschner for these heavy duty side cuts. This is our, basically when we flip this over, this will be our left landing gear. We're going to mirror this exactly to make our right landing gear. Now if you bent this perfectly and you did everything right, you should actually be able to make the second landing gear half out of this piece here. But we do include the extra so you have plenty of length to work with, and if you do make a mistake, you can always go back and try again. So now we're just matching up our landing gear wires with the other piece, but we're going to make sure we mirror it. So there's our first length. Very simple. We're gonna grip it, bend it down a little bit past 90, then bend it back to 90 to get that nice sharp edge. Next length that we have is right here. Bend that straight towards us, about to 90, and we'll bend it back. And most importantly, we're going to match that angle up that you see right here. So we need to make it just a little bit sharper. And our last portion that we're going to bend is going to be right here. 90 degrees. Nice grip. Ah, there we go. You can use a vise if you need, but a good pair of pliers is really all you need to do this well. I'm just going to twist this. Make sure we're happy with the fit. We want to lay this down. You can see we just have it a little bit longer than what we need, so we can cut that short. Alright, so both of our landing gear assemblies are now done. I went ahead and just test fitted this, and our next step we want to do is just to give it a test fit into the wing. So what we're going to carefully do is we're just going to rock this down. Keep in mind that we did put that paint stick on that back edge. If you didn't do that, don't put a landing gear on it because it'll just push right through. And we're going to make sure it looks good. Same process on the other side. Rock it down, support it from the back as we push down. That looks really nice. So what we're looking here, kind of exaggerate a little bit with this ruler, we want to make sure that the landing gear is not moving its wheels in or out, and that this is nice and perpendicular, and it's also cocked forward, so where the landing gear axle is just ahead of the leading edge. Now, on a typical scale MiG-3, these are actually kicked back quite a bit, but it's going to be incredibly difficult to land properly unless you have these move forward. So make sure where your axles are line up with the leading edge on both sides or just a touch in front. That looks really good on both accounts. We'll set this back down. We can remove our tires. And we'll do one at a time. Nice healthy bead of glue. Got our scrap foam board handy. We're going to press this right down in, just as we did before. Come right with our scrap board. And press that glue down in to make a nice seam. If you don't have enough glue to press in, you can always put a little bit more glue on top and press it in again. This is going to be the main strength of your landing gear. Same process on the other side. Needle of glue goes down. You can see that we're being a little sloppy on it because we want to bubble up there. Nice and flat. Scrape off the extra. As I said before, if there's not enough glue and you want to go back over it again, that's absolutely fine. Just put another bead right over there. Smooth it out. Now typically I say to give this about a minute and a half. Let's walk away with this for a good solid 3 minutes because we really want to make sure that there's no wiggle and no motion in this area, or else it's going to compromise the strength. Alright, we've given this about 3 minutes to dry. We're going to go ahead and lay on our wheels. Now you can use a wheel collar for this, but I actually just like to use a little hot glued glob right around the edge. It actually works really, really well. Let that dry. While that's drying, we're going to go ahead and reinforce the skid with one of our barbecue skewers, and we're going to cut it about 1/4 of an inch longer than what it needs. And we can just use our side cuts and kind of chomp around the edges. We'll lay a thin bead of glue down. Smear it out. All our glue joints are dry. Let's go ahead and flip this over and see how nice it looks. We are now ready to move on to the next step, which is installing our Powerpod and our servos and getting ready to fly. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to install the Powerpod, get your controls all hooked up, check your throws and your directions, dial in your dual rates and expo, and get ready for its maiden flight. We're now ready to go ahead and put on our Powerpod and get our electronics hooked up. Let's go ahead by starting with a bound receiver to our transmitter. Now for this, we're going to be using the Spectrum DXE binding to an AR610X. This has already been pre-bound and configured for 2 aileron setup. Now if you have a receiver that has less channels, like a 4-channel radio, that's okay, you can wire the 2 ailerons together. The reason why I like dual aileron is because you can adjust things like sub-trims and travel individual from each other. So to get started, let's go ahead and route our little servo wires, and we're going to go through the back hole that you see here. We can reach right down in, we can grab both our elevator, it's not going to be as long, and we can grab our last lead, which is going to be the rudder. Alright, so this is on the right side, this is going to be our elevator, the left side is going to be our rudder, and these are our ailerons. So let's go and plug these in. So this is the elevator cable, and if you look on our Spectrum receiver here, you're going to see ELEV, that's elevator. And if you go down where you see what looks like a horseshoe, that stands for the signal wire. The signal wire is either going to be white or orange. In this case, it's orange. So we're going to line this up and plug this in, just as you see here. Now we're going to take our rudder, plug it into RUDD. Now it doesn't really matter which one's which. We're going to take our aileron control, we're going to plug it into AILE, A-I-L-E. Always making sure our signal wires line up with each other. And our last one, we're going to go to aux1. Now in our power pack C, we do give you plenty of extensions. We also give you Y harnesses, so you can choose to configure this however you want. If you have this connected to the servo Y, all you need to do is plug it into aileron and you're done. I'm going to go ahead and let this kind of wander in the back. We're going to slide this in nice and carefully. Keep in mind we're going to kind of have to wiggle this around a little bit to get our ESC over the hump. There we go. We'll just leave this loose for right now. We're going to reach down, we'll grab our wire, we'll plug it into throttle. So let's take a moment to review our connections here. We got our throttle, very first one, signal wire to the top matching this, aileron 1, elevator, rudder, and aileron 2 is all on the far end. If you guys want to do the third person perspective, you can plug into this gear mode and draw power out of it. Now that we have our power pod in place, let's go ahead and use our skewers to fasten it in place. Our first skewer is going to go through this bottom here, and with a rotating motion, we're going to make sure that we can pass it through on both sides. Sometimes you have a little glue in there and you got to kind of twist it through. Once we pass it through both sides, we can pass it all the way and out the other end. I'm going to cut this just about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now we're going to go ahead and go to the back. We can stick our finger down and lift this power pod all the way up against the top surface. Same process as before. Pass it through one side, pass it through the other side. If you're using our kits, we already have the holes pre-cut. And then we'll pass it right on through. Now we do sell reinforcement discs to be able to kind of double up on this foam board, so if you do have a crash, it kind of makes things a little bit stronger, but you can also glue an excess gift card or a credit card down and drill the holes through to reinforce it. We'll cut this about 1/8 of an inch. We're going to save this. This is the last hole that you see right here is for our hatch to lock the hatch in place, so we're just going to put this aside for right now. Now my favorite battery of choice is the Hyperion 4-cell 1600 milliamp all the way up to the Hyperion 4-cell 2500 milliamp. Just keep in mind you're going to have to move your battery to get the proper CG. And don't move your battery too far forward where it interrupts with the hatch. So now we're going to go ahead and check our control throws to make sure everything's moving in the right direction. If we move our aileron stick to the right, we should see the right aileron rise. And it does. Obviously if we move it to the left, we should see our left aileron rise. If they both go up, we need to reverse one of those channels. Make sure that the aileron that rises, the opposite side aileron, is falling. Now when we pull back on our elevator, we should see the elevator go up. Push forward, we should see it go down. That's correct. And when we move our rudder to the right, we should see our rudder go right and our rudder go left. Perfect. So to make sure our throw gauge is working properly, or to make sure that we have our ailerons at the proper throws, we have a high rate and low rate. We're going to put this down on the wing, and we're going to move this up. And if we followed our holes, it should line up perfectly. We're looking about 12 degrees on low, 16 degrees on high. go to each control surface and make sure to adjust your travels so you get that 12 degree and 16 degree levels. Then go ahead and dial in your expo at 30%. If you guys are wondering what dual rates and expos are, we'll have a great video linked down below to explain it a little bit further. Every radio is going to be different, but Spectrum are very easy to program. Every radio can be a little bit different, but generally they follow the same steps per brand. We're going to show you how to do it on the Spectrum DXE. To get into our main menu, we're going to click down on the rolling bar. We're going to go down to dual rates and expo. Click once. And now we can scroll over and we can assign it if we want it on a certain switch. So in this case, we'll have it on this guy right here, switch C. Oops. So now we have our two positions. Our first position is going to be 100% throw for high rates, and we're going to roll it over to 30%. To get our 12%, it's going to be roughly about 80. So we're going to move this to 80, or to where our gauge actually shows up on 12%. Make sure this is at 30, and we're done. Now we can assign the switch that we want the dual rates to be on, so we can make the elevator, rudder, and aileron all be on one switch if we wish, or you can customize it to make the ailerons work on one switch, the elevator work on another, and rudder work on another. That's totally your choice. Alright, we're going to go ahead and dial on the throws for each one of these surfaces, and we'll move ahead. Alright, our controller's all set up, all of our throws are set up, so we have high and low rates. We're now going to go ahead and drop our little receiver down in. What I like to do, let's just take a piece of tape on the receiver here. I'm going to press this down in and tape it vertically. This is going to give us the best signal strength that we need, because this is a faster airplane and we don't want it to get far out of range and compromise any control signal. Our next step is going to be to install our Velcro. Now I like to put the fuzzy on the fuselage just because it rhymes. I'm going to go ahead and cut the included Velcro in half. And we're going to stick this portion right on the bottom of our Powerpod like you see here. The second portion, I'm only going to cut about a quarter, because the fuselage really helps keep this in place. I don't want this to be so sticking in that it's so hard to get out. So I'm only going to put this on the very end. As far as batteries, you have a wide selection of batteries we can use in this. We can go down to a 1300 4-cell for really short burst powers, but you're going to need to move that battery forward. My favorite is using anywhere from a 1600 milliamp 4-cell to a 2200 milliamp 4-cell. You can even do 2500 milliamp 4-cell. Now if you're a beginner, you can use a 9.6 prop or a 10.47 prop and fly off of a 3-cell. But if you're going to be flying off a 4-cell power and going faster, make sure you don't put on any prop that's larger than a 9 by 4.5. If you put a 9.6 on and run on a 4-cell, it's going to overheat the motor and the ESC. With a 9.45, it'll draw 27 amps and be perfect. We go ahead and place this on. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and drop our battery in, and the battery is going to be what decides your CG. The CG is called center of gravity, and that's how your plane balances. If your plane is too tail heavy, it's going to fly terrible. If it's too nose heavy, it's going to fly like a guided lawn dart. You want the CG to be proper so you have maximum control authority and the plane behaves properly. So I'm going to be using the 1600 milliamp. We're going to go ahead and slide this in. We're going to go ahead and just keep the edge right about right here. That's about our general good spot. Before we put the hatch on, we're just going to give it kind of a preemptive balance. We're going to go 2 inches back from the leading edge. We're going to pick it up, and you're going to see it's just slightly nose down. Let's go ahead and put our hatch on one more time, keeping in mind we do have the weight of the prop we still got to work with. There we go. Once again, we're going to go about 2 inches back from the leading edge. This MiG actually balances about 22 and 20% from the leading edge, not 33 or 30 like you typically see. So if you balance this with the cord 1/3 of the way back, it's going to be very squirrely and not fly well. Once you fly it your first time, you can always go back and adjust your battery to how nimble you want it to feel. Now that we have everything balanced out, we're ready to go ahead and put the prop on and get it ready for its maiden flight. As I said before, if you're going to fly a 4-cell, make sure your prop does not exceed a 9 by 4.5. If you're flying 3-cell, you can go 9.6 or 10.47. So this is a counterclockwise prop, which is what we want. All right, we're going to put our washer on the back. If you guys have bushings with your props, make sure you use them. Those are your precision fit. And Dan Sponholz is doing a great work. I believe if you're watching this video now, we're going to have some links to some STL files. He made an awesome 3D spinner, but I would encourage you to make sure you know how to 3D print properly and you're using the right materials so you don't compromise that and have it blow up. If you want it for aesthetic purposes, that's great too. Now you're going to notice that there's one last hole in our fuselage that you see right here. This is actually to lock the hatch into place. Now typically, because of the direction of the wind and everything, you're not going to have any issues with this. But if you do want to lock it down, we're simply going to slide this through. It's not going to puncture through anything in the middle. It's just going to come out the leading edge over here. So I'll slide this through. Got it right over to the other side. Now you can't see what this barbecue skewer is doing, but this is locked in. It's not going through that hatch because that material is thin. What it's actually doing is when the hatch goes back and locks in, the skewer goes in front of it to keep it from moving forward. So if you want to remove your hatch, slide out the skewer, slide it forward, lift it up. All right, at this time, our MiG is now ready for its first maiden flight. At this point, we're ready to go out and maiden our FT MiG-3. Unfortunately, we are not blessed with dry, calm weather, so we're gonna have to postpone that. But if you are going to maiden it, I'd strongly suggest that you check out our video, 6 quick tips for a successful first flight. It'll give you a lot of really good pointers just to double check to make sure you have the best experience possible. As always, we want to thank you for watching. We hope you build this and thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. And unfortunately, since we can't fly this for a maiden, check out this footage that we captured when we did the main release.
Dude, this is cool. It's like I'm playing a video game, third person.
Yeah.
Ooh, I see somebody. I'm gonna get you.
I saw somebody.
I'm going after that red person. Who's
All right,
that?
that's me. All right, let's form up.
All right, Blue, I'm on you. This is really cool. This is like a...
I got you now. I'm getting in this. Oh, there we go.
I'm coming right in on you.
I'm in the front.
Forget the streamer.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
I got somebody on my tail.
Oh, I got you. I got you. It's tangled it.
All right, I'm gonna go after Alex.
Free line.
I got Alex.
No. All right, Josh, you're going down, man. Josh, I'm on you, man.
Are you?
Yep.
Ooh, yeah.
Ooh.
You almost got the
Dude, it's like
streamer.
I'm flying a real warbird. You gotta look for a little speck in the sky.
There
That's
you
your
go.
enemy.
Dude, I had you right there and you disappeared on me.
I see somebody.
Gotcha!
Dude,
Great work!
Warbird.